Welcome to How to Set Up Your Learning Pod 101. I'm Waine Tam, co-founder CEO of Selected, and I'm joined with Alex Thorson. She actually may not be on right now, but she'll be joining a bit later. She's our Director of Community and Content. Just by way of introduction about Selected and Selected for Families, our service that we have recently offered. Selected is an organization that we started 4 years ago. Our role is really to match teachers and schools, K through 12 teachers and schools for jobs. That's what we've been doing for the past 4 years in schools, primarily throughout the Northeast, the West Coast, Arizona, and Texas. And based on, of course, what's happened over the past couple of months, including a surge in parent interest in accessing and connecting with teachers, we decided to open up our platform to allow parents and families for the first time to reach out to teachers directly. These teachers, of course, have been hired by our schools or our school partners for the past 4 years, and now you have access to them as well. So we think it's a pretty cool opportunity for families to connect with teachers that are qualified, relevant, and actively seeking families like yours to support. And so just a couple things on Selected and Selected for Families. There's over 35,000 teachers on Selected. Of course, not all of them are interested in, as much as we hope, not all of them are interested in learning pods, but a fraction are and are actively seeking roles. 40% of our teachers are people of color. They have significant teaching experience, so over 70% have 2 years and more of teaching experience. All of them are approved by us, and also they're all actively job seeking, so you're not wasting any time connecting with them on Selected. And exciting news, but as of yesterday, I believe, we have opened up Selected families to really in the entire country. So of course, we're the deepest teacher pools and availability are those in the areas that we've historically served, which again are the Northeast, from Boston to DC inclusive, along really the Northeast corridor, Northern, Southern California, Arizona, and Texas. But now we're building, we're allowing the ability for families to reach out to teachers everywhere. So, and finally, last but not least, 10% of all our revenue from the family side go to our grant program that supports all high need schools who have been affected by COVID to help them recruit teachers during this difficult period. So that's about Selected and Selected for Families. So let's get on with why you're here. So first, in terms of just participant introductions, I would love to know where people are calling in from. So on the bottom of your screen, if you're on a desktop or your phone, there's a chat button. Great, so a lot of California, that's fantastic. Chicago, New York City, of course, Boston, Denver, thanks June, New Jersey, so pretty great representation throughout the Midwest, Michigan, fantastic. So thank you all for being here. New Mexico, wonderful. Thanks, Julie. Okay, so in terms of participation during the webinar, please participate. There's the chat window. We will have polls and Q&A throughout. So as you have questions, please send them via chat. We'll also have time at the end for Q&A. This is not the actual spoken portion of this was not intended to take up the full hour, so there definitely will be time at the end. But if you have questions as they come up, please ask them so you don't forget them, and we can answer, and we can also answer them in line with our comments. And then on follow-up, we'll leave this at the end as well, but access our blog. There's a lot of great information there at families.getselected.com/blog, and any questions, just email us at families@getselected.com. So in terms of the agenda, we'll cover, say, 6 core items here. First, the basics. I think everyone knows what learning pods are, for example, but we'll cover that really briefly. Second, what do families want? We have a number of families and data that we've collected from families, and we want to share that back to you so you know that you're not alone in this, and also give a sense of what's going on in the market and where the trends are headed, so you can stay ahead of them. The working arrangement, what are different formats? What have we seen? What are common arrangements and concerns that families have in setting up pods? Of course, a big topic of those who are in the hunt for a teacher, compensation. What is the going rate? Health and safety, of course, is a primary concern for all of our families, and what to think about in syncing up with the other families in your pod as well as your teacher. And finally, finding your ideal teacher. That's something that we've added to this. There was a prior webinar that we held this, so this is a new and improved version of that. So thank you all for joining this one. And yes, we'll be sharing the recording as well as the slides in an email after all this as well. So what is a learning pod? It's taken on kind of a life of its own in terms of how it's defined. Originally, it was really kind of a group of families. a small group of 2 or more families, I would say, of similarly aged children, which is beneficial for a couple of reasons that we'll talk about, mainly for ease and of teachability and the function of the teacher. This group of families would align with health and safety issues and oftentimes come from the same district or from the same school. A learning pod could also be a single household, multiple children in the same family, but really what learning pod is at this point is really kind of a small group, a small group outside of or in addition to the current school that a child is attending. And we'll talk about in working arrangement what that means. And the goals and benefit of learning pods are pretty consistent. Not surprisingly, the number one goal is academic progress. It's what we heard as the number one from families as their biggest concern coming out of the spring and heading into the fall, as supplementing remote learning, health and safety, of course, enrichment, socialization, and a way to personalize learning because the class size essentially is very small. So just to make sure everyone's up to speed on what a learning pod is. In terms of just starter considerations before we get into the meat of the presentation is as you start thinking about a pod, there are a number of considerations to make. One is, do you pod up with others, right? And the primary consideration there is, of course, probably cost concerns, budget, how many children are involved. Another variable there, as we talked about, is the variability in grade levels. If it's pretty broad, say like 1st and 5th grade or 1st and 6th grade, then one consideration could be splitting up the pod into 2 separate pods because oftentimes it can be suboptimal to teach all those, to have a teacher teach all of those kids at the same time, although they certainly can, and that's what they're trained to do. So, but that's a consideration to think about. Another consideration as you add more families to your pod is, of course, the complexity of doing that, the time, energy. We know how hard it is to sync up your own family, but to do that in conjunction with others, of course, can be another expense or burden. So that's consideration 1. 2 is, we talked about this, grade levels. It's beneficial to cluster in adjacent grade levels if you can. If you can't, that's okay. You have to do what you need to do. Curriculum needs. What this means is it really impacts the function of the teacher that you hire, meaning if your child, and in most cases, vast majority of cases, that the families who reach out to us are keeping their child in the same school that they're enrolled in the spring, and they're going to continue that enrollment into the fall. And so most are seeking supplement to the remote learning experience. And it sounds like a lot of districts, if not most districts, I won't say all, but it sounds like the trend will be 100% remote learning to start. And so in that case, the child is enrolled in school, but there still, of course, is a curriculum that the teacher, the learning pod teacher, can use and support and facilitate. And so in that case, the curriculum is school provided, as opposed to saying you are telling your teacher to create their own custom curriculum that is outside of the school provided one. That's less frequent, but it's possible. So just to let you know that that's something that will help. If you can communicate that to the teacher that the school is providing that curriculum, that will help in terms of recruitment and just getting them to understand what the role actually entails. Okay, so this is what 500 plus households have told us since early July, and that number has grown. But just to sum up, the growing majority are looking at learning pods versus for the individual household, and that makes sense. I mean, in the beginning, actually more people were looking for individual households, but I think as time went on and people realized the complexity of doing this and the cost of doing this, more people are saying, look, we can split this up and work together on this. So that makes sense. In terms of common characteristics of what the 500 plus households have said to us, that initially, again, this slide has actually changed since last week because of how schools, because of the reopening of schools. But initially, most families were looking at, say, the first semester. So we're looking at learning pod through the first semester through January-ish, and then we'll reevaluate. And now the trend is moving towards the full academic year and potentially almost an indefinite experience, but definitely moving towards a longer duration. That actually will probably help most families in recruiting teachers because, and we'll talk about the recruitment of teachers, but the more kind of consistency and longer duration that you can offer them is helpful in making in coming to an arrangement with a teacher. Again, I mentioned this, most teachers are looking for part-time supplementation to remote learning and having their child enrolled in the same school as they were in the spring. The children are typically of elementary age or younger. We do see middle and high school as well, but of course, the vast majority of cases are of younger ages who have greater difficulty, of course, with remote learning and online engagement. And common characteristics, again, we talked about this, academic progress is number one. Finally, which was interesting, as we polled the parents who are interested in our service, education, degree, and certification are highly valued. So in thinking about the type of teacher that you're looking for, that parents are looking for their child or children through this to support them in remote learning. Okay, let's see. So next, we'll launch a poll. So those who are on the desktop or phone, you'll be able to see this. So the first poll is just a quick poll on where are you in your process. So are you just doing research? You're just starting? Have you kind of come to a basic agreement with other families and have a better sense of what you're looking for? Do you have actually firm commitments? Are you starting your teacher search? Have you hired somebody? Congrats. And are you just done and you're potted up, ready to go? Last week, most people, I think there was one person who had hired a teacher. So I'm curious how that's progressed since then. And it looks like we have 4 people who are beginning their teacher search. So that's pretty cool. So I'll share this. Yeah, okay, we're waiting for a couple more answers. Looks like the vast majority of people, about 75% of the people, are just starting and doing research. So you've come to the right place, and we're here to support. And we can also, of course, help anywhere of the spectrum, kind of anywhere in the continuum you are at. But I'll end this poll and share this back out so you can see. Okay, so next we'll talk about working arrangement, the various durations that you can pick. Of course, it really depends on your view of COVID and how safe school reopenings and the school year will be for you. It's hard to tell, of course, but again, as we mentioned, that duration is lengthening probably into the full academic year at this point. In the beginning, the majority of families were looking for at least a full semester, and again, that is lengthening. This matters to teachers looking for full-time employment because they're leaving. If they don't have a job currently or they're leaving their school, they're used to, of course, even an annual contract that's how it works at schools. You get an annual contract, and of course it's a full-time job with benefits, all that. So the more consistency and duration you can offer, the better and easier it will be to recruit. Hours, same principles apply to hours per week. It really depends on your needs, part-time or full-time, because of the variable nature of remote learning in terms of what percentage of the week it may be, and that may change heading into, say, the latter part, second semester of the school year. One suggestion we make is offering or potentially a retainer structure. So if you can't, just to guarantee a certain number of hours so the teacher can block that off in their schedule without, because who knows if it's in person, it could be during the actual school day, it could be outside of it. So that gives you a little more flexibility to structure around what could be volatile period during the school year. And also, as you think about the hours per week, or more relevant, the compensation of dollars per hour, don't forget that teachers do spend a significant amount of time outside of the pod classroom to prep, to lesson plan, and potentially to grade. So we'll talk about this on the compensation side, but as you think about the hourly rate, remember that they do spend time outside of the actual time in your pod or in the classroom on other ways to support your children. Okay, so next poll will be, how many hours per week are folks looking for? And so less than 10, of course, the whole gamut. If you don't have any idea, that's okay. Actually, there's no option for no idea. I took that off. And this matters because, and I bring this up because it matters. People have different definitions of teacher, right? In some cases, it's a certified a certified teacher with a master's degree in education who has worked in a classroom. It could be a tutor. It could be someone with just expertise to guide your child through a particular subject, or just be there in more of a child care or daycare type fashion. And so your hours will likely reflect that need as well. So let me share this bag. It looks like most people are clustered around, let's say 10, it's really kind of 10 to 30. I'll share this out, but most around 10 to 20, and then centered around 20. So let me share this back out to you. So that's interesting. So most people, 40% are kind of 10 to 20-ish, and the rest are basically kind of 20 to 30. So it's, and that's interesting. But it really depends on your needs, and how, because it's so local, because the school response is so localized, it's hard to generalize across across the whole country. Okay, so compensation. Baseline, our recommendation, given what we've seen already in terms of what's being offered to teachers, and again, the teachers that I'm talking about are those who have, say, masters of education. They're certified. They probably have classroom experience. They likely have classroom experience. These are teachers that you expect in the classroom. The baseline compensation, you should expect to be more than competitive with the average teaching salaries in your region. More than competitive because, well, first I'd like to say that the teaching salaries in regions are publicly viewable. You can Google them and you can see, usually it's a published schedule by the local district. It's categorized by years of experience. It's also, it's also, other variables include certifications and education level, things like that, but it's published and you can see that in the local district. But I would expect that you should expect to be more than competitive. One, because they earn like benefits, of course, and potentially access to a pension. It's an annual contract, things like that, but also because the supply is pretty limited. The supply is limited, and ultimately it will be supply and demand. And so you should expect to pay more based on the flexibility that you require, which is, of course, a part-time nature. That's why we said in the beginning, the more you can guarantee in terms of hours, the less, on the margin, the less that you would have to per hour you would pay. And so again, so as I guess what we've also seen is average, and this is across all of our regions, so it's a pretty general number. Right now, the mean is somewhere around 40 to 50 an hour, something like that. Again, this is a generalization, it's a mean. So it's across multiple regions, and again, people are looking for different things, from a very experienced teacher with masters, all that stuff, certification, to someone with maybe none. And so that's kind of the midpoint. And then it can go up, as you might imagine, from there. And just so folks know what teachers lose, there are a lot of benefits from joining a learning pod, of course, that we've talked about for both the family and the teacher from a work environment and health and safety perspective. But they lose their team, the support from their team and their school, of course, the annual the annual contract benefits, things that they acquire just being part of the school district, and also prep and lesson planning time outside of the pod in the classroom. So there are things that they lose. There are a lot of things that they gain, but again, it's really supply and demand. And right now, demand is pretty high. So sorry, I didn't share out the hours per week to you, but you can see those right now. So in terms of the next poll, what are you willing to pay per hour? And the scenario here is, let's say it's a part-time position, around 20 hours a week for a certified professional teacher. And all of these answers, by the way, if it's not obvious, are confidential. There's no recording of your names associated with your rates or anything like that. But thank you for voting. We got about 50% of folks who have voted so far. It looks like actually it's clustering around the 40 to 60 range, which is interesting because last week it was slightly lower. It was more clustered around the 20 to 40. So that's interesting also. So it's not surprising. I mean, given the supply of teachers, which there's a structural issue, of course, in terms of the supply of teachers, but demand has far outshot it. So let me end this Thank you for voting. I'll share this back out. So yeah, it's basically clustered around, there's a bucket around 20 to 40, and there's a bucket around 40 to 60. So that makes sense actually. And it really depends on where you live and the localized supply of teachers. That's why this is challenging and it's hard to generalize, because it's a common question. What should I pay? What should I pay? But it's really dependent on where you are. But this hopefully gives you a sense of the broad disparity, right? There's people, and I'm guessing there are definitely people, they're at 100 and over 100. And again, there are also specific circumstances and specialties that that families may need that a general education teacher doesn't have. So just some context of why there's such a disparity. Okay, so health and safety. Not surprisingly, everyone in the pod should align on some health and safety protocol. We have offered guidelines on that in our blog, and we'll share links at the end, as well as email the follow-up. But of course, your tolerance, your COVID risk tolerance, your social behavior, what do you adhere to the general social distancing rules, things like that. Whether you do or not, it's important to align on what those are with the other families in your pod. And as you discuss these issues with your pod, how to resolve any differences. And of course, if there are differences that are reconcilable, that's fine. As long as you communicate what those are and understand those differences, and if you can't resolve them, you can't resolve them, great. I mean, it's actually good that you communicated and got that out. If you can, that's great too, because what's most important is communications. And even after you come to an agreement, the communication should not stop, because there will be incidences and other issues that come up that will require a lot of teamwork to get through. So for example, if someone gets ill, what happens? Does the pod shut down immediately, indefinitely, or what time period? A couple days, 14 days? Who does the cleanings? There are other, and we lay this stuff out in our kind of health and safety guidelines as well, and CDC has some guidelines around what to do in that case. But what happens? And come to agreement as much as you can on these issues in advance. Other things that we've seen parents discuss are bringing essentially vaccination records to make sure that not just COVID, where everyone's focused on COVID, but other, and make sure everyone is properly vaccinated on all the other potential illnesses out there, that they historically have been vaccinated before they go to school. And also, what are the teachers' needs? What are the teachers, of course, this is your pod and you dictate the rules, but also to be empathetic of what the teachers' needs are, again, in terms of recruiting them and hiring them to a new environment, making them feel comfortable, something to consider. Operations. So this is, as it relates to health and safety, if there's multiple host families, does the actual learning environment move among different host families? Or does one host family just own that? And what happens, of course, there is, do they get some kind of discount off kind of the overall funding that they're committing to the pod? For example, cleaning, temperature checks, another thing that has come up, regular temperature checks. We've actually had one family require regular kind of COVID actual testing of their teacher, and helping facilitate that. Single-use towels, lunch, all these operational issues that come up, something to talk about with of course, the other families in your pod. Okay, so this is the next poll. Will children in your pod wear masks? Yes, basically yes within 6 feet, or no, because that's essentially the whole point of being in a pod. All right, we have final votes to come in. We got about 70% voting. Let me report this back. It's pretty dispersed, actually. It's interesting. Majority of people, or not majority, I guess, but most of the people are saying no, and basically no, or unless the teacher requires it. But it's pretty even. About 42% say yes, and the remainder 58 say essentially some variation of no. So just so folks know what other families are thinking, and of course there's a wide dispersion. So in terms of finding other families that align, these, of course, are important questions to think about. So, so this section is really around defining and finding your ideal teacher. This is a new section that we added since our last webinar, but really to think about, these are some questions to ask as you think about your ideal teacher. Remember, we talked about compensation being a wide range. We talked about your needs, of course, they're highly variable, but what is really important to you? So for example, is having a certified teacher important? Is that important? There are many teachers who are uncertified and many great teachers, for example, at private schools or parochial schools who aren't certified at all. So is that important to you? Is a degree in education important to you? Similarly, most people who are state certified have degrees in education because that's a requirement. At the same time, there are a number of teachers, tutors, etc., who do not. And how important is that to you? And of course, that will impact the number of candidates that you have access to, as well as your compensation. Is prior classroom experience important? In our survey data, and I think I shared with some of this in the beginning, state certification and degree in education were actually viewed, were highly valued, also highly valued by the teachers inquiring about our service as prior classroom experience, because in the case where there's a couple kids, if your pod is 5, maybe even up to 10 children, being able to manage a classroom could be an important skill. But again, that's for larger situations, larger pods. Also, what is your priority? Again, most parents select academic progress, but at the same time, you may be looking for someone who is focused more on enrichment, executive function, socialization, social emotional learning, other things that you think your child needs specific help on. That will help define who you're looking for. What type of individual does your child respond to best? Where are areas of growth for your child that you want to support? Thinking about these things are important, of course, for yourself, but then also thinking about these in the context of other families. And we'll talk about this in the next section, is once you think about this and you actually have to find that person, making sure that you align on what is important so that you, as a pod, can come to agreement of what teacher fits best for all the children in your pod. But staying on this topic, the final bullet is really around any critical or preferred expertise. Maybe that's a specific pedagogy. Maybe it's, for example, Montessori or Reggio Emilia or Orton Gillingham, or all these other kind of specific pedagogies or skill sets. Or it could just be someone who's skilled in math or a world language for a child. But the key distinction here is what's critical versus what's preferred, because that is going to affect the search for a teacher and how quickly you can actually hire somebody. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't share the results from the mask. I'm sorry. So right now I'm sharing the results from the mask poll. And so we come to really finding and hiring your ideal teacher. So once you've thought about what goes into your ideal teacher, you got to find this person. And so as we mentioned before, the supply of credentialed professional teachers are already limited. And so you may need to expand your potential pool of educators to a broader range. Although there's still a good number of them out there, and depending on how, oh, I think someone's drawing. And depending on how this goes, in terms of how the school year goes and where teachers, it's hard to predict how if teachers are going to stay or what they're going to do when schools reopen. But right now, it's pretty limited, but there are definitely teachers there. And we're working hard to surface those for you. In terms of finding teachers, you can post these jobs on job boards, of course, Facebook, Craigslist, things like that. Of course, hiring and matching platforms like us, like Selector for Families, we can connect you with credentialed and professional teachers. And then we'll talk about the interview process really quickly. Is again, the key thing here in your pod, and this is the reason why we know this works, is of course we advise schools on how to hire teachers as well. And it's really important to align on your preferences versus non-negotiables and to have a consistent scorecard as to what matters most. Literally a scorecard, of say, these are the 4 things that matter the most, and rank, say out of 4 or 5 point scale for each of them, rank all the candidates that you talk to on each of these, so that as a pod, you can come to a consensus about, okay, these are the 4 things that we value the most, and these are the couple candidates that scored highest on all of them. Or, total score was the highest. Something that normalizes it and takes at least that evaluation process out of kind of judgment, because you all came to a consensus prior about what was non-negotiable as kind of critical needs for the children in the pod. That also, though, coming to consensus there will dictate the interview questions that you ask. And we have a bank of them, which again, we'll supply a link to that as well, that you can ask your teachers. And also, we highly recommend if you lead or ask for a demo lesson. Basically a demonstration of them teaching something to your child. And that works really well for schools, because it's just like I'm sure many people on the phone have interviewed people. The best way to test somebody is just to have them do something that on the job that they would be literally doing if they're hired. And so we would highly recommend asking the teacher to do a demo lesson, teach, and we can help, these are things that we can advise you on as well, but have them teach a lesson to your child, see how the child responds. And also it'll give you a good sense of how the connection between the child and your potential teacher. But we say all these things because we have resources also on our blog, and also if you need additional support, those are things that we can provide. Okay, so I think this might be the final poll. I think you guys may be tired of polling, but let's do the last one here, which helps us really identify where we can help you more. And where you still need help on it. I noticed in the beginning, a lot of people were still early in the process. And so this will help us spend more time on those areas that you need more help on. Thank you for voting. The votes are coming in. About 60% have voted. It's there's no clear, there's no clear winner. It looks like interviewing is slightly edging out the others. But it looks like it's kind of interviewing and a cross between the operational side of things. So around the contract agreement with the teacher, as well as insurance and facilities, things like that. So let me end the poll so I can share this back with you. And so you can see what other people are curious about as well. And so the good news is that we have a lot of resources to help you interview and hire a teacher. That's what we do. Or what we've done with schools, and what we will do, and hopefully help with you. And the other things, we're definitely working on things like drafting up a template for a contract, and we can share that when that's ready, as well as support on the operational side, or more support on the operational side. But those are things that we have in the hopper. Yeah, stay tuned and join our newsletter if you haven't already. Okay, so we're at the end, and I think we have about 20 more minutes time allocated, so for Q&A, things like that. But our blog is at families.getselected.com/blog. So there's no HTTP, there's no www. It's just, you can just type in families.getselected.com and find our blog. We have a DIY checklist, so a checklist that runs through a lot of things that we talked about today and more. We have a health and safety protocol that goes into how to communicate, questions to ask, how to basically probing questions, how to communicate better with your pod mates, what different COVID risk tolerances you can classify yourself in and use that to norm across your pod. We have an article around how to interview a teacher, which leverages a lot of the resources that we offer to schools that you can take a look at. And we also have a piece on salary considerations that we continue to refine based on the trends that we see. My email is there. Alex's email is there as well. Waine gets selected, Alex gets selected, and we also have a Facebook group for families that you can communicate with other families and with us. And if you're a teacher who happens to be on the line, you can sign up for being a teacher at getselected.com. So that is, pretty sure that is the conclusion. Yep, that's the conclusion. So if there are questions, okay, sorry, I've totally missed questions.
Waine, as you're looking in there, I think I caught all the last two.
Oh, thanks, Alex.
Yes.
So Alex is here to rescue me. Thank you, Alex.
Yes.
Okay, so June, in terms of fees for our services, yeah. So what we do, we started last week. We opened up our platform to self-service. So prior to self-service, it was really like a full service option. And but now we offered a way for you to just go in, sign up for free. You can go in and start searching for candidates. To contact them, we charge you by the invite. So there's different invite packages that you can use to contact candidates. It starts at $200 to contact candidates and goes up from there. But again, all the candidates are actively looking for jobs in the home, with families, and they're already been pre-vetted by us. So we hope that you can have, it's geared towards speed and effectiveness to find a match with our candidates. And you can filter by COVID tolerance, location, expertise, things like that. But it's free to sign up and view all the candidates to start. So to see if the number of teachers in your area is sufficient and worth the cost. So in terms of resources specific to California, I guess, Keith, I'm assuming you're referring to, say, like daycare rules or things like that. If it's related to that, we don't have specific resources related to the legal considerations, nor would we. You should definitely not rely on us for legal advice. But I think from the daycare perspective, so long as there's, what I know, and is so long as there's someone at the home, and that's, again, this is the things you have to consider when you talk about the pod and the working arrangement. If you have someone at the home who is a guardian, which is likely, and I think in most cases that we've talked to families, then that should be okay. That would be considered daycare, and as long as the child count doesn't exceed a certain number, I think you're okay. But Keith, I'm not an expert in California, and that's hard because every state has different rules as it relates to daycare. Are there educational subjects, for Jonathan Miller, are there educational subjects that are more conducive for this arrangement? I don't know what you think, Alex. I mean, more conducive. I mean, I think the fact that most of the families are working with, most of the families are interested in this, have kids of younger age, and you're looking at, say, elementary school or younger, most of the teachers who are certified in that area have a certification that covers K through 5 or K through 6, and so they're trained to cover all the grades, and they're trained to cover all the subjects and all the grades in that range. So I don't think there's a specific subject that is more conducive necessarily for this arrangement.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. We've got teachers in every subject area looking for in-home roles, and I think the only time that things start to get tricky is when you have large groups of students, so you start getting 5 and above at all differing age and grade levels, because that's a lot of lesson planning for a teacher, even if their lesson planning is just supplemental and they're trying to keep kids engaged. It's just a lot of different levels to think through.
And so, okay, so from Vicki, what is your vetting process? What cities do you serve? Alex, do you want to take the vetting process one?
Yeah, so we partner with schools of education and other teacher organizations. We also do our own content. So webinars like this, we do them for teachers and schools of ed. Prior to the pandemic, we also did a lot of in-person things with schools of education in front of their undergraduate students and graduate students. So that's where we source. When we're then vetting for teachers, we're looking for things like teaching certification or degree, and 80% of our teachers are going to fall into that bucket. And that other 20%, we're looking for people who have teaching experience in, say, charter schools or private schools, which in most states don't require a teaching certification to work in. So we're looking for that. And then on the rare occasion, we get a career changer who has extensive background knowledge in the content area they want to teach, as well as experience working with the grade level that they're wanting to teach. So maybe working with sports. So like middle school sports, you're then going to be a middle school science teacher and you had been a biologist for 20, 25 years. So we get some of that as well, including professional athletes who end up wanting to be PE teachers and mentors at the middle school and high school level. So every now and then we get that. We're also looking through resumes to see if there are any red flags or strange employment gaps that we can't find an answer to. So we'll hop on the phone with teachers. We'll kind of ask around, it looks like you're leaving your positions mid-year. It's happened more than once. What's going on there? To see if they are people who might do that to our families and other schools. So those are the things that we're looking for. We leave the background checks up to the school because each school in each state has a very different process for checking on backgrounds.
Thanks,
And we
Alex.
serve all cities.
Yeah, so that's news. That's news this week. In terms of the cities that we have most teachers in right now, it's really, as I mentioned, on the East Coast, Boston down to DC. So Boston, New York City, Philadelphia, actually throughout New Jersey. So northern, central, southern New Jersey, Philadelphia, Baltimore, and DC. On the West Coast, the Bay Area, Sacramento, Southern California, so both LA and San Diego, in Phoenix, where Alex is in Arizona, and San Antonio, Austin, and Texas. But again, we just literally this week, we now serve really cities all around the country. So wherever you're at, Vicky, I'm hoping that we can serve you. Is there any, from Keith, is there any long history in some community of small pods hiring teachers to completely replace other school homeschooling pods, major lessons learned versus just supplementing? Not that I mean, I don't think there's a long history. This is coming from me. I don't believe so. I think this learning pod phenomenon is relatively new. In terms of replacing school, our data shows that, and again, our service is really to help connect parents with teachers. And so our data shows, in terms of the demographic that's coming to us, are the vast, I'd say 90% plus of families are keeping their kid enrolled in the school that they were in the spring. And so, but that's us. There are other companies that offer essentially a school replacement model, right? They either are a school themselves and offering learning pods as a kind of an alternative format, but still within the school structure. And there's also new schools kind of popping up and saying, hey, this is so again, our demographic is one thing, but then there's another demographic of new schools that are popping up, and maybe they have a different kind of experience and data they're collecting and saying that, there are definitely families that are opting out of their school. We just don't see a lot of them, but there may be other kind of schools or entities seeing that. I don't know if that's clear, but this is all fairly new, I think, to us, and the lessons to be learned. That's not for now. That's going to be as it plays out through the school year. I think it'll be really interesting to see how this all plays out. Okay, Tracy, forgive me if this was covered. Are you able to connect with teachers that live around our neighborhood? Depends where you are. Tracy, you definitely feel free to email us after or just let us know now. Again, if you're in a major city on the East Coast or West Coast and Southwest, you're probably covered. But if you're not, you'll be covered soon, hopefully. So it'll depend. It really depends where you live. From M. Taylor, would you charge the same for supplemented teaching enrichment and lunch resets at the same rate of 40 to 50 an hour? I mean, again, it's highly variable. All I can say at this point is that seems to be kind of a baseline going hourly rate for part-time supplementation. And it really depends on its supply and demand. It really depends on that teacher, even if it was going at a lower rate, that the teachers may line up a separate opportunity, right, at a higher price. So it's hard to say, M. Taylor, it really is. I'm sorry. It really depends also the variability, like where you are. But I would say that you can the good news is if you are able to connect with teachers, test out, just ask them what their range is and see where. That's what I would recommend is if you don't know and don't have a clue, just start asking what their range is. They'll have an idea, I'm sure. If they don't, that tells you something as well. But definitely ask, and you'll figure out where you can triangulate around.
Yeah, I think this is also really thinking through what qualifications you need a teacher to have in order to meet the needs of your family or your pod. If you're looking for a certified teacher with a degree in education, they're going to be pretty top dollar at this point, both in schools and in families. If you're looking for someone who is a substitute teacher or a college student in a school of education who has not yet graduated, that's going to highly impact what they're expecting, desiring, and even requiring to take on this role. So I would think through some of that. But yes, if you're looking for a true full-time teacher to come into your pod, whether at a full-time or part-time status, you're probably looking at the 40 to 50 hour baseline.
And the good news is, at least on our platform, you can filter for these things. So if you want to look for someone with fewer years of work experience, fewer years of classroom experience to bring down the price, or someone who doesn't have a master's, or someone who does, you can toggle these features so you can kind of pinpoint what meets your needs rather than kind of looking at a general fashion. So we, our platform can also help if you have, narrow down that range a little bit. Okay. All right. Well, no more questions. I think we got to all of them, but we appreciate your time. Thank you for coming. We will send these the recording as well as the slides to you, everyone who signed up for the call or the webinar. And thank you. Definitely reach out with any questions. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.